Hey guys, welcome back to our second last Android track talk today. It's going to be presented by Kurt. He's going to be talking about ConstraintLayout 2.0, interactive animation, state management, and property manipulation. Just a brief history of, or bio of Kurt. Kurt is classified as a software engineer by profession, but aspires to be an entrepreneur by heart. He has been working on Android since 1.5, professionally and personally. Newfound love for anything fitness related. He also reads manga. So, yeah, props on the manga. Cool. So yeah, thank you so much, and let's go to your talk.
Cool. Thanks, peeps, for coming to this talk. And yeah, as the title says, I'm going to be covering ConstraintLayout 2.0 and what the new stuff that's within it. And it's currently in alpha at the moment. I think it's alpha 2 as of today. Yeah, the last I checked. And yeah, so what am I going to cover today? So I'm going to look at what they have is constraint properties. That's a new class that they have in there. I'm going to talk about constraint layout state. I'm also going to talk about the helpers that they have in it. And the last thing I'm going to look at is motion layout. Most of the stuff that we're going to talk about, the chunk of it, is going to be in the last one, because there's not much to talk about in the first three. Cool. So let's start with constraint properties. So what is constraint properties? Constraint properties is if, I don't know, let's see by the raise of hands, who's used constraint layout before? Damn it. I wanted to lie to you guys. So yes, no pressure. So if you've used constraint layouts, you'd notice that some of the stuff you can't do it like dynamically with the API. So what they did with constraint properties is they exposed some of the properties so that you can do that without going through XML. So that's basically what constraint properties does. Even if you look at the object class itself, it just extends from object. So think of it like the way you would deal with layout params. That's exactly what it does. Does that make sense? Or should I explain that more? I don't know. That's as basic as it comes. Cool. And then I'll talk about constraint layout states. Well, this one doesn't have a class that you can use dynamically. This is like a declarative way of dealing with states. The easiest way of explaining this is if I give you an example. So I'll show you, like, let's say you've got a screen and you want to load data on it. How do I play stuff? And there's no internet. It'll show you like a retry screen or something, and then you want it, when you add internet, you click on the retry, and then it shows you the screen again. So if you think about that, that is like two states of you've got two states of your view. You've got the state where you have data, let's call that state 1. And then you've got a state where you show if you've got an error, which is your state 2. So basically, if you're doing it, if you've done Android before, most of the time, you probably be like, okay, so I'm going to do this. Maybe you're going to have an XML file, you do a merge on it, you put the first layout, and then you put the second one, and then you say, if I've got internet or there's an error, set visibility of the first one to hidden and show the second one, or do the vice versa. But if you've used constraint layouts, if you started using constraint layouts, you know that in constraint layout they've got what they call constraint sets. And with constraint sets, it would look something like this. Well, this is in Kotlin, but it's basically Java anyway. It looks the same. So I'm going to explain what this is doing. So I've got my constraint layout class. That's the first line there, and then constraint sets deals with, it's like, it makes it possible for you to switch between two constraint sets within your constraint layout. So you can say you want to transition from one constraint state to another state. So that's what it helps you do. So it makes it easy to do what I said previously, where you manually have to handle the visibility and whatever. So you can do that with constraint layout. We could do this pre-2.0. And this is how you would do it. And then you create your constraint state, and the first one I have there, that constraint state set 1, I'm just cloning whatever state I have in my current file, And then constraint say 2 is I'm cloning another layout file, which should be probably the same, has the same views as the first one, but it has a different state of my constraints. So what I do next now is, if somebody clicks the button, I'm saying, I'm checking if I have to change my state. Am I changing to the first one, or am I changing to the second one? So that's what constraint say does. So this is the old way of doing it. With the new way now in ConstraintLayout 2.0, they've got a different way of doing things. We've got what they call constraint layout states. So this is kind of like declarative in a way, as in there's less code for you to write. All you have to do is you have to declare your states in XML. So this is what your XML file looks like. So you do that in your XML folder. You create a constraint layout state file, and then you create the states that you want in that XML file. So if you look at the first one, that first tag with the state, I've got an ID of 1. We can call that, if I'm using the one I used, the video I showed you for network error, I could say my first state is progress. I don't know. In this case, I said my ID is 1. And then I'm saying my constraints load the layout code state 1. And then I've got another state called 6. I just named this because I like 3 characters. So, and if you check that on state 6, it loads a different layout called state 6. The stuff that I put in red there, that's a different parameter I'm going to talk about later on. So when you have this XML file, all you have to do is you've defined your states that you can switch between. And then when you go into your code now, all you have to do is, on your constraint layout file, you just pass it a load layout description, and you point it to the XML file you just defined. So it makes it way more easier, and it's less code, in my opinion, anyway, for you to do to switch between states. And when you check now, I'm changing state. When somebody clicks on the button, I just set the state to the state that I want. So if you have like 6 states within your XML file, you just define the state that you want to change to. So that's constraint layout state. Am I going too fast, too slow? Let me know. So that's basic constraint layout state. That's the new thing. The other thing that they introduced in 2.0 is what they call the helper objects. This is a bit of, okay, so the easiest way to explain it is to think about, if you've used Android Studio, if you right-click on if you've got a constraint layout file, if you right-click on it, there's an option to give you helpers. And helpers in there, if you've used, I hope you guys have been using that because it makes your stuff easier. You've got things like you're creating a guideline, creating barriers, and stuff like that. And they've got new stuff in there where it's possible for you to create things like a linear helper, secular reveal. And at the same time, they made the API, they exposed the API now, it's public, so you can create your own helper objects. So what are these helper objects? It's just, these are, I like to explain them as view groups that you can see at design time, but they are not inflated at runtime. So it's like, if you've used Photoshop before, it's like groups stuff together. So let's say you've got 2 text views, and you want something common to be done to the 2 of them. You probably group them with a layer helper, and you say where you can unite them together at the same time instead of having to go one by one to setting visibility. So that's something that you can do with helpers. And if you look at this, this is like a component tree in Android Studio, where you have the text view and the button, they're within that layer called reveal. So that could be your helper class to do that. And there are also 3 groupings of helper objects. There is what they call layout manipulation. So with the layout manipulation, this is what you use when you're laying out the views. It helps you to do that. And then you've got what they call post-layout manipulation. So these are called after the layouts. And then you've got decorators. Decorators are things like, I don't know, you want like a bubble effect or something like some physics to be done onto your views. That's pretty much what you get out of helpers in 2.0. And now we're going to look at MotionLayout. I think most of the time is going to be looked at this. So how many people again have looked at MotionLayout? Yes. Cool. So what's motion layouts? Motion layouts, if you look at it, it's just a constraint layout, but it's like a Uber constraint layout, in my opinion, anyway, which helps you to do stuff related to animations. So it helps you to manipulate states between different constraint sets of the views. What is it exactly? Like I explained, it's a subset. Constraint layouts, it helps you to do layouts, animations between constraint sets. And for you to be able to use it, you use what we call motions in files. So what they try to do is, well, you might be asking, why in the world are we creating another animation framework again? Because if you think about it in Android, we've got like tons of animation frameworks. We've got the view animation, I think that's from the package Android.view.animation or something, which is the basic one that we find from API 1. And we've got the the animator framework. That's for the animating anything, like value animator, you get your object animating, stuff like that. And then you've got things like coordinator layouts that you can use to animate stuff like your toolbar and stuff like that. And then you've got your physics, rendering, animations, and why motion layout again? So this gives you the basic one. It's like, it bridges the gap between those complex animations. But to be honest, why you would choose motion layouts from all the other animations, I think if you can answer the question of, is the interaction involved between the user and that animation that you're trying to show, then probably motion layout is a better use case for you. You can't be using motion layout for stuff like your splash screen animation. There's no interaction there. You're just launching a screen, there's an animation, and then it goes. You're going to be using motion layout to make it easy for you to do things like, okay, if somebody clicks on a button, I don't know, you want it to jump or have like a sprinkle effect, I don't know. So if there's user interaction on it, if there's a swipe or seekable or anything like that, then probably motion layout is a good fit for your use case. Now we're going to look at how you would use motion layout. Like I explained, if you used, I'm showing it when you're using Grader, yeah. So you'd use it from Android X, and you export it as 2.0.0. Since it was introduced in Alpha 1, you can use 2.0.0 Alpha 1 or Alpha 2. I hear there's Alpha 3 coming soon, probably like next week, I don't know. But this will work for you at the moment. Once you have the implementation done, you've got it in the library, and then you can use it everywhere you have a constraint layout. If you want an animation, just substitute the constraint layout with the motion layout tag. And after you do that, then you can start manipulating the constraints within that motion layout file. Cool. With the motion layout file, like I explained, it uses what they call motion scene file. So it's declarative, as in they do not want you to write code at all. So all the animations that you're going to be doing that in XML. All of it. Think of it, you can do stuff like a view pager, that all swiping on a view page and stuff like that. You can do that in XML, all of it. There's like a talk from Chris Baines where he shows him doing like a sick animation of a view detail where he has like a card hopping on a other card and doing shadowing stuff, and everything was done in XML. It kind of gets daunting, but if you look at how you do it, if you were to write code for that, that would be like tons of stuff that you have to do. And motion scene files just make it easy. I'm going to explain what the motion scene file looks like. So if you're going to look at a motion scene file, it's comprised of these 3 top-level tags. So you have your XML, in your XML folder, you create your XML file, which is a motion scene file, and then you've got what they call state sets, constraint sets, and transition. I'm going to go through most of them, if I have time. And we'll start with constraint set. So what is constraint set? Constraint set is where you define the constraints that you want to transition between the states. So how do you do that? There's 2 ways of you to do that if you're using a constraint set. You can do that by reference, or you can do that by actually declaring that within the XML file itself. I'm going to show you that at the end so that it makes sense. If I'm talking, it kind of doesn't make sense. I'm not making sense to myself. Anyway, so you can do a reference to say, I want, within my constraint set, I want it to reference to this XML file to get my constraint set. Or you can literally, within the motions in file, declare the states, the constraint states that you want to transition between. And what can you do with within the constraint set? You have different interpolators of stuff that you can do with it, like the animations, like the states that you want to change between. So what you can do on a view, you can change these constraints, like the alpha, the states, the visibility, the elevation, the rotation, translation, scale. You can also do custom stuff. But custom stuff, you can do it the same way if you worked with Object Animator, where you use reflection. You define your own type of method with a getter and setter, and then do stuff. I'm going to show you how you do that. I just want to go through the slides. Cool. So if you're going to do that with a custom attribute, and so you can have a custom attribute, and if it's a custom attribute that you're doing for the animations, these are the custom types that you can use. You can use a custom color, custom integer, custom float, string, dimension, and boolean. Unfortunately, these are the things that you're limited to at the moment. But it's sufficient enough in my use cases so far. I don't think you need more than this at the moment. And then you've got what they call keyframes within custom attributes. So keyframes help you to say, let's say you've got two states of animations. You've got state 1 and state 2. Since this whole motion layout does is, it checks the states that you have. Let's say you've got a view from point A and you're moving it up to like point B in the second state. And you say, I want to animate it. Your motion layout engine might just say, okay, let's just do a straight line up to, and animate it up to that view. You might not be happy with that. Maybe you wanted to go with like a curve, or you wanted to go zigzag or something like that. So keyframes help you to change that. You could say, when you're 25% within my animation, I want you to go down and then go up, whatever. And you can do that all in XML. I'm going to show you how to do that. And then you've got, inside the keyframe, you've got what they call a key position. So these are the attributes that you have and what you can define within it. So you've got like a delta relative. And that's like you're saying, I want my change to change. I want my change to be relative to some particular delta. And you can have path relative. Path relative is like from a particular path, and parent relative is like from the whole screen. I want it to be relative to the parent of my container. So, like I was explaining, this is stuff you can do if you don't want to go straight and you want to do a zigzag. You can do that. And then you've got, that's keyframes, I explained it. And key attributes. These are a bit more complicated. This is a bit more physics. And it just helps you to have more fine-tuned animations. And I'll give you an example of like an animation that you can do that is complicated, which has multiple states in it. So if you look on this one, you've got that arrow at the top right. If you click on it, it rotates and points up, and at the same time, there's an animation of, instead of having a text view with just the time, it then shows you the description on it. That's like a bit more complicated than you'd expect, but with that, you can do that, all of that in different states. You can do that with just 2 tags in an XML file, instead of writing like tons of classes of code. Cool, so I think I'm doing good time. So I can do a demo now. Cool. So I'm going to explain what I was talking about, as in what it looks like when you're using a motion layout. So I've got my project here, a simple project. I've got ConstraintLayout alpha 2 and that I'm using. And then I've got my main activity, and I'm just using this menu view here. This has got a motion layout on it, and I've got this custom class I call label view. Just think of it as a text view. And I'm saying I want you to load animations using this XML file called transition1. So if I go to my XML folder, there's a transition1 in there, and this is my motion scene file. So what is my motion scene file doing? It's got a transition in it. I'm saying when somebody swipes on a view with ID menu text, and I want you, and their anchor is to the right of the view, I want you to transition from the constraints that's defined in layout 1 to the constraints defined in layout 2. What are those constraints doing? If you look at those constraints, so I'm starting off with a view like this. It's got my view at the left, and then the last state I wanted it to be to the right. So what this is defining in the constraint state is, like I said, if I drag, I want you to animate, and I want it to last a duration of 1,000 milliseconds. What does that look like? Cool. So my start state is to the left. If I drag, okay, I'm going to explain one thing. You see this, I've got a show paths is go to true. So motion layout is that attribute. It allows you to be able to debug your animation. So you see the path that your animation is going to take. So in this case, that's that dotted line. So if I drag, it animates to the right. If I just swipe, and you didn't have to do anything. All you have to do is just write this XML file, and it does that. When I was talking about the motion scene file doing by reference, this is what I was talking about. As in, you give it the constraints, and you tell it the layout files that have those constraints. So you don't define them within the motion scene file itself. It's like you're saying, yeah, get your constraints from this file, get your constraint from this file. One thing I have to note again is, if you're using motion layout, if you've got, this was my whole view, and I've got a label on it. If you put any constraints in here and use motion layout, it will ignore them when it does the animation. So you have to be, all your constraints, you have to put them in your motion scene file, in the constraints, motion files. Okay. So this is the reference one. If I'm not using the reference one, this is what it will look like. So this is transition 2. It does the same thing as the first one, but instead of saying, go get your constraints from a layout file, I'm saying, yeah, get your constraints from constraints defined by an ID of end. Get your constraints from constraint set defined from a constraint defined by ID start. Where are those defined? These are defined here. I've got my first constraint here called start. I've got my second constraint set code end. And this one does exactly the same as the first one. So if I go to my initial XML file and change from transition 1 to transition 2 and use that instead, it's going to do exactly the same. The only difference being I wanted to show you the stuff that you can do within a motion layout file. So if you look at this one, it's doing exactly the same, but there's one thing that I did. There's an interpolator here. I'm using the alpha one. So I'm saying when you start, its alpha is 0.5, so that's like half transparent, yeah. And then when you end, I want it to be fully opaque. Or is it the other way around? I think, yeah. So if you look at it, yeah, it's half transparent and then it's opaque, yeah. And you don't have to do anything. It will calculate everything in between. So that's part of the transition that you can do. So I did some other examples here. So if we look at transition 3, I'm doing something different here. Just have to figure out what. Okay, let's just run it. Yeah, this is exactly the same. Cool. I'm going to go straight to transition 4. So if I change this to transition 4 shows you what I was talking about, custom attributes. Let's say you want to animate something they don't have in the system. I chose something simple. I'm going to go back to what I was telling you about why I call this label view. This is a text view, but I'm doing something funny within that. It's just a text view, and what am I doing? I have a set number on it, and when I get that number, I change the text and format it and write that value it's like a set text, but it uses a number instead. So what I'm doing in transition 4 now, I've got a constraint. It starts my animation, and it uses that number. You see that number thingy? It uses reflection and goes to my label view and looks for something called set number on it. So in this case, when I'm starting, okay, let me close stuff here. So in transition 4, I'm saying, on my view, I want you to set the number to 0. But I want you, at the end of the animation, I want you to set number to 100. Does that make sense over? This is a custom attribute, okay? So whatever you put the name there, it looks for a setter on it. So I'm starting with a 0. And I'm saying the last thing I want on it is 100. That's transition 4. And I'm using transition 4. What does that look like when I'm doing my animation? Because I'm using, this is almost the same as Object Animator, where you can animate anything, any object value, like a property. So in this case, I'm just animating the number value. So it's going to start from 0 and animate everything in between up until it gets to 100. So if we go back to my label view, it starts with a 0. And if I drag it to there, it animates everything in between 100. That's just a simple one. You can do crazy stuff in between, like animate an image to say morph between some face and this is the last face that I want you to morph into. And then it gives you like, I don't know, morph into a werewolf or something. So that's a simple way of doing custom attributes with label views. This is the simplest that you get. Yeah. And what else did I want to show you? Transition 5. What am I doing here? Okay, cool. So this one is showing you what I was talking about putting in keyframes. As in, you don't want it to animate just the straight. Like everything I've been doing so far is just been get from here to there, animate, it's straight. In this case, now, in my motion scene file, I've got a keyframe set. So I'm saying when your Y position is at 10%, when your frame position is at 25%, I want you to morph the Y position to 10% of the final value. So it's going to go 10% up, or is it down? I think it's up, yeah. And then when it's at 75%, it's going to go at 90%. So it's going to go 10% up, and then it's going to go to 90%. That's what I'm doing. And I'm saying this change of position is relative to my parent, which is my whole screen. So you can do a delta like the ones I showed you. So what does this look like? Sine wave, something like that. I hope I was right. Yep. So you see, I'm just dragging straight. Does it show my dragging? Yeah, cool. I'm just dragging the right here, but it knows from what I told it where to go. If I'm at 75%, then it goes down, and then it goes up, and it's still doing all those other animations I was doing with the numbers and everything. So you can do like crazy stuff. Like if I'm using transition 5 here, I can show you something. Let's say I want you to. Can I do rotation here? Cool. I'm going to start with a rotation of 0. And I want the last rotation 270 maybe. This is probably going to animate everything that we talked about, but at the same time, it's going to calculate the rotation. Cool. If you were to do this in code, it would probably take you like an hour, if you're lucky, or a day on a good day. In this case, it's like we're in 2 lines of code. Cool. What's the last thing I wanted to show you guys? Cool. Okay, so in transition, the top tag, you can't. It's you've got 2 things that you can do: interactions. You've got the on swipe, which is like a seekable type of thing where you swipe and stuff, and then you've got the on click here, and it does what it says. It's instead of the swipe, it will do the animation when somebody clicks on it. And in this case, I'm doing the same stuff that I was doing before, but let's see if we can read what it's doing. Yeah, I'm doing exactly the same. I'm starting from a bias of 0.1, so it's starting to the left. I'm starting with a value of 100. And then my last thingy, I'm doing the rotation, and it will be to my right. And I've got a value of, I don't know, 99999. So the only difference between this and the last one is the on-click only. Yeah. So if I change my motion layout to use transition 6, when I click on it, and then it enters the animation. The good thing about this is you've got reverse animation and you don't have to worry about it. If I click on it, it's going to do the reverse of it and go to the start. You've got things that you can inject, again, if you want to say a listener to know when the animation ends or to know the state of the animation, where it is, you can do that in code. That's the only thing that you can have if you wanted to like know when an animation is done or whatever. It's just like any other animation API where you've got a listener to listen within it. And that's motion layout. This is the easy part. You've got the complex part where you have the physics and the different types of algorithms. That was mind-boggling for me to even understand. But it makes it where you can do like motion arcs and parts and complex stuff. Which I don't think you really need if you're going to do any normal day animations, unless if you're doing like a sick the welcome screen with, I don't know, if you've seen the Google Fit one, that one is insane. And yeah, that's motion layouts. Cool, I'm gonna go back to my slides now. Cool, so far I've shown you how to deal with the motion scene file from XML. That means you have to remember a lot of stuff like the tags and everything. But the cool thing that they promised, well, what was the statement they used? They said you would be able to do all of this from Android Studio. I can't see where I was now. Cool. So what they demoed was this. So they've got like, if you've done any animations, I don't know if with Blender, I've used Blender before, or Adobe Premiere or something like that. You've got that small little bar at the bottom. So instead of you having to go into an XML file and define all those XML states and everything, all you have to do is you've got the first bar in your UI designer. You just drag the views where you want them, and then you create the key states, and then it calculates all those constraints there. Then you change them, and then you go to a different part, and then you click on the keyframes, and then it calculates the next states that you have to go to. And then you just click play, and friggin' voila, and everything is done for you. So they promised that this is coming soon, and they're trying to refine it, but fingers crossed that it comes soon. Cool. And thank you, guys. That's... Ask me anything, or not. Yeah. I think I've got, what, how many minutes do I have? I don't know. Yeah?
Probably a bit outlandish, but using
Yep.
Is there any way to detect collisions between objects?
No, because it's declarative. You're just telling it do this and that. It doesn't know anything about this state is going to collide with that. So yeah, I don't think you have that. Yeah, no.
Great presentation, by the way. The demo
Cool.
was really, really good.
Cool, thanks.
Just want to ask, this might be a non-issue.
Yeah.
Is there any visual artifacts if you've got a complex animation?
Yes, sometimes you do have those. That's why they have keyframes. Because that's what I was talking about, as in, you just tell the system, I want to go from position A to position B, but it's possible, like he was talking about, as in, while it's animating to the position that you want to it might collide with something else. So the only way you can deter that or fix that is to create a key position, as in, when it gets to this frame, instead of doing that collision, put some constraints on it. And then it will recalculate the path that it will take so that there's no collision. At the moment, I don't think it's possible for you to be able to fix that. I don't know if I have time or not. Do I? I don't think I do. Cool. I've got 2 books I'm supposed to give away. I'm going to ask 2 questions. What's a motion file? Motion scene file. No, sorry, man. Yeah. Yeah? Yeah. Yeah, cool. Android or Kotlin?
I want to try Kotlin.
Cool. This one is heavier, man. Last question. I talked about helper objects. How many types of helpers did they introduce in 2.0? Lady at the back. Sorry? Nah, sorry. Ladies? No ladies? Huh? No. I tried. No. People just wing it. Okay, I'll ask a different question. What's new in ConstraintLayout 2.0? Yeah, cool. Thanks, guys.